The first time they laughed at me, I told myself it didn't matter. People will always find something to mock when they can't understand your choices. But deep down, I remembered every smirk, every whisper, every insult disguised as a joke. I told myself to stay quiet and keep working, because one day, the same people who mock my job would have to come knocking on my door. And when they did, I'd make sure they understood the difference between mockery and respect. My name's Ethan Miller. I grew up in a family that believed success only counted if you could show it off. Fancy cars, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, that was their language. My father was a corporate consultant, my mother ran a real estate firm, and my older brother Lucas managed investment portfolios for wealthy clients. Me? I was a repair technician. I fixed electronics, worked in a small workshop downtown, and built a side business refurbishing old computers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I loved what I did. But in my family's eyes, love didn't matter, status did. Every Sunday dinner turned into the same show. Lucas would talk about closing big deals, my mom would brag about new listings, and my dad would ask me, still working with those tools? Then came the laughter. Not cruel in tone, but sharp enough to sting. My brother once joked, "Hey Ethan, maybe you can fix the company's Wi-Fi when it crashes. At least you'll be useful." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I was making a promise to myself. I wouldn't stay small forever. A few years later, I moved into a modest apartment above my workshop. I had steady clients, a loyal customer base, and enough savings to invest in something bigger. That's when I noticed how many small businesses struggled with IT systems. So I started offering full-scale tech support and data management for local companies. Word spread fast. Within 3 years, I wasn't just repairing computers anymore, I was running an IT solutions company that supported regional firms, law offices, and hospitals. My clients trusted me because I kept things simple, transparent, and efficient. By year 5, my company, Miller Systems, had contracts worth millions. I didn't flaunt it, though. I still wore plain shirts, still drove my old sedan, still worked hands-on with my team. But the balance had shifted. I wasn't the kid with greasy hands and a toolbox anymore. I was the one people called when their entire infrastructure went down. And funny enough, the same family that mocked my job didn't even know how successful I'd become. Then one winter morning, I got a call that set everything in motion. It was from a law firm, Henderson and Burke. The lawyer on the other end said, "Mr. Miller, we'd like to schedule a meeting regarding a partnership dissolution between 2 firms. They've chosen you as the third-party technical consultant and signatory for the asset approval." At first, I didn't think much of it. I handled digital asset reviews all the time. But when I saw the names on the client list, my stomach dropped, *Whitmore Financial Group, *my brother's company. The same firm where everyone once laughed about my little repair shop. For a moment, I almost turned the job down. But then something in me shifted. Fate had handed me an opportunity, and I wasn't about to waste it. I called back and confirmed the appointment. 2 weeks later, I walked into the sleek glass tower downtown where Whitmore Financial had its offices. I still remember the receptionist's puzzled look when I gave her my name. "Mr. Miller, you're here to meet with legal counsel?" she asked politely. I nodded. She led me to a conference room with marble floors and a panoramic view of the city. I could almost hear my father's voice echoing in my head, bragging about Lucas's success in this very place. When the door opened, Lucas walked in with 2 partners and their lawyer. His confident smile faltered when he saw me sitting at the head of the table. "Ethan," he said, confused. "What are you doing here?" I kept my tone calm. "I was hired by Henderson and Burke to oversee your digital asset settlement. I'll be reviewing the data, confirming compliance, and signing off on the transfer once everything's approved." The room went silent. One of his partners cleared his throat and said, "Wait, you're the Miller from Miller Systems?" I nodded. That's right. Lucas looked stunned. His lawyer turned to him, whispering, "Your brother owns Miller Systems, the IT solutions firm handling our data review?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. I opened my laptop, projecting the contract details on the screen. "Gentlemen, I've already received your data inventory and client ledgers. There are a few discrepancies I'd like to clarify before signing." I scrolled through documents they barely understood. It was surreal watching the same people who once called me a technician with dreams, now waiting for my approval to finalize their multi-million-dollar deal. As the meeting went on, I noticed how quiet Lucas became. Every time I spoke, he flinched slightly. His voice, once so condescending, was cautious now. You really built this company?" he asked quietly. I didn't look up. "Yes. While you were laughing at my job, I was building something real." His partners pretended not to notice the tension, but the air was thick with it. I finished reviewing the documents, flagged a few missing reports, and said, "We'll need to delay the settlement until the inconsistencies are resolved. Send me the corrected files by Friday." Then I packed my laptop and stood. "Pleasure doing business with you." When I reached the door, Lucas called out, "Ethan, wait." I turned slightly. His voice cracked when he said, "I didn't know you were doing this well." I smiled faintly. "You never asked." That night, I went home and sat in the quiet, letting it all sink in. I didn't feel like gloating. There was no need. The satisfaction came from knowing that life had a way of balancing itself. You can't look down on people forever without someday having to look up. Over the next few weeks, Lucas tried calling me a few times. Sometimes he'd ask for advice, other times he just wanted to talk. I answered politely but kept my distance. The old pain didn't disappear just because he was humbled. Some wounds don't need revenge, they just need time and silence. When the final partnership documents came through, I signed them with steady hands. My name, Ethan Miller, appeared right below theirs, not as a technician, not as the family disappointment, but as the one with the authority to approve their deal. I didn't rub it in. I didn't send any message afterward. I didn't have to. That signature said everything. Months later, I got an invitation to my parents' anniversary dinner. I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. When I walked in, I noticed something different. The same people who once mocked me were suddenly careful with their words. My mother asked about my company's new contracts. My father, who used to call my work manual labor, said, "You've really made something out of yourself." Lucas stayed quiet most of the evening, occasionally glancing at me with a mix of guilt and admiration. Toward the end of dinner, he raised a glass and said, "To my brother Ethan, who taught us that real success doesn't need to be shouted." Everyone clapped, and though it sounded sincere, I knew this wasn't pride, it was realization. They finally understood what I had known all along: respect isn't given because of money or status. It's earned through persistence, integrity, and humility. After dinner, Lucas pulled me aside outside the restaurant. "You know," he said softly, "I deserved that. Seeing you in that meeting, it reminded me that I used to laugh at someone who ended up being 10 times stronger than I'll ever be." I didn't respond right away. The old me would have tried to make him feel better. But this time, I just said, "We all learn eventually." He nodded. "Yeah, but you learned before any of us did." As I walked away that night, I felt a strange mix of peace and closure. Revenge hadn't come through anger or confrontation. It came quietly, through success, through patience, through the kind of power that doesn't need noise to be felt. The truth is, sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong, it's living in a way that makes their insults irrelevant. The people who mocked my job used to measure success in wealth and applause. Now they measure it in the quiet realization that they misjudged me completely. Every time I walk into my office, I remember that meeting, the look on Lucas's face, the disbelief in his eyes. That moment reminded me why I never gave up. Because the world always underestimates quiet workers. They laugh at the ones who build slowly, who grind without showing off. But when the dust settles, those are the people left standing when everyone else's image collapses. Life has a funny way of teaching humility. The same laughter that once haunted me became the echo of my motivation. I learned that success doesn't need to be loud, and revenge doesn't need to be cruel. It just needs to be inevitable. So to anyone who's ever been underestimated, remember this: you don't have to fight every insult. Let time do that for you. Keep building. Keep moving. Because someday, when the trap of arrogance closes around those who laughed at you, you won't need to lift a finger. They'll be the ones asking for your signature. And when that day comes, smile, stay calm, and sign the papers, just like I did. Because that's the sweetest kind of victory, quiet, dignified, and completely earned. When Ethan was growing up, she thought love meant being seen, being valued, being believed in. But in her family, love came with conditions, and respect was something you had to earn through status, not sincerity. Her parents, Richard and Evelyn Miller, came from a long line of polished professionals, people who valued appearances above all else. Her father managed investments, her mother ran a real estate company, and her older brother, Lucas, followed in their footsteps, becoming the family's golden child. Every achievement of his was celebrated. Every flaw was forgiven. But when Ethan chose her own path, one that didn't shine under office lights, they didn't just disapprove. They mocked her. She was 22 when she opened her small electronics repair shop in a narrow downtown corner between a cafe and an old bookstore. The smell of solder, plastic, and coffee filled the air most days. She loved it. She loved fixing what others threw away, finding life in broken things. But her family didn't see art or purpose in her work. They saw failure. At every family dinner, their words cut a little deeper than they realized. Still tinkering with wires, her father would ask with that disappointed smile. You were always the creative one, her mother added, but maybe it's time to get serious. And Lucas, charming, confident, cruel without trying, would laugh. Hey, at least she can fix the toaster when it breaks. Saves us a few bucks. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Ethan. She smiled politely, but her silence wasn't acceptance. It was survival. They underestimated her because she didn't fight back. Because she didn't argue. She learned early that explaining herself was pointless. They didn't want to understand, they wanted her to conform. To them, success had to be loud, glamorous, and expensive. Her quiet persistence didn't fit that mold. They measured life in titles, not fulfillment. They saw her greasy hands and tired eyes and mistook them for weakness, not realizing that what she was building was worth more than their hollow applause. Outside their world of luxury, Ethan worked late nights surrounded by humming machines and soft music. She repaired computers, rewired circuits, and started taking small business contracts for network setups. Slowly, her skills caught attention. Small offices called her for help, schools trusted her to maintain their systems. One by one, her clients grew. But she didn't tell her family. She didn't need to. She wanted her success to be quiet, so quiet that by the time they noticed, it would already be too late for them to belittle it. Still, the ridicule followed her like a shadow. At weddings, reunions, and family holidays, relatives would ask the same question in different tones. So, what are you doing these days? It was never curiosity, it was judgment. When she answered, I run my own repair and tech services business, they'd nod slowly, eyes glazing over, already losing interest. Someone would inevitably change the topic to Lucas's promotions or her father's new property deal. She had become the invisible one, the sibling they talked around but never to. What they didn't see was that Ethan was changing. Every insult made her stronger, more focused. Every smirk became motivation. When she looked at the circuits on her desk, she saw herself in them, complex, resilient, underestimated until you understood how she worked. She started studying cybersecurity, upgrading her certifications, and forming partnerships with local companies. Within a few years, she wasn't just fixing electronics anymore, she was running Miller Systems, a registered IT solutions firm serving clients her brother's own company would one day depend on. But at home, nothing changed. Her family still saw her through the same narrow lens. One night at dinner, Lucas bragged about $1 million merger, and her father proudly clapped him on the back. "That's the kind of ambition this family is built on," he said. Then he turned to Ethan. "You could learn from your brother. You've always been too small scale." She smiled and said nothing, even as something inside her snapped quietly into place. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. They would never understand her value until the world forced them to. The irony was that Ethan had everything they said she lacked. Independence. Discipline. Purpose. She didn't need to wear suits or sit in glass offices to feel accomplished. She built something that mattered, something she owned. Her business was stable, profitable, and ethical. But she never bragged, never flaunted, never sought validation. Her revenge, she realized, wouldn't be loud. It would come dressed in professionalism, in success that spoke for itself. Years later, when fate finally placed her across the table from her brother's company, she didn't feel nervous or vengeful. She felt ready. Because all those years of ridicule had trained her to stay composed under pressure. The girl they once called naive was now the woman whose approval would decide their multi-million-dollar deal. She didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to remind them of the jokes they made. Her presence did that for her. The underestimation that once haunted her had become her greatest strength. Because people like Ethan don't explode, they evolve. And by the time the world realizes who they've become, it's too late to look down on them. So when she walked into that boardroom and saw the surprise in her brother's eyes, she didn't see humiliation anymore. She saw justice. Quiet, patient, poetic justice. The kind born from years of being told she wasn't enough, until she became more than they could ever be. Her family once mocked her for fixing broken things. What they didn't realize was that while she was fixing machines, she was also fixing herself. Piece by piece, wire by wire, until she became unstoppable. And in the end, that's the beauty of underestimation, it gives strength to those smart enough to use it. Ethan's quiet ambition didn't look like ambition at all, at least not to the people who judged success by how loud it was. While her family chased promotions, corporate titles, and applause from their social circle, Ethan chased improvement. Not for show, but for survival. She didn't wake up one morning planning to build an empire. She just wanted to be good at what she loved. What began as a small shop filled with scattered tools and tangled wires slowly became her sanctuary, a space where she turned silence into progress. Every morning before sunrise, she opened her workshop, flipped on the fluorescent lights, and breathed in the familiar scent of metal and solder. She wasn't fixing machines for money alone, she was learning them. Understanding how systems failed and how to rebuild them better. There was something sacred about restoring what others had thrown away. She'd sit there for hours, her hands steady, her focus unwavering, and in those quiet hours, she grew. Her family never saw that growth. They only saw what they wanted to see, a daughter wasting her education on repairs. Whenever she visited home, her mother's questions came like tiny daggers wrapped in concern. "You're still doing that repair thing?" she'd ask, voice dripping with pity. Her father didn't even bother pretending anymore. "You're too smart for that kind of work, Ethan," he'd say. "You should be in management by now." And her brother Lucas, with his perfect smile, always added his own sting. "Don't worry, sis. Everyone takes time to find their real career." But what they didn't know was that she had already found hers. Her quiet ambition was taking shape beneath their radar. Word of mouth was spreading about the young woman downtown who could fix anything. Small businesses began calling her for maintenance, then for upgrades, then for long-term contracts. Her clients weren't high-profile, but they were loyal. They trusted her. And trust was something her family's polished world of transactions never truly understood. Ethan spent her evenings studying while others went out to celebrate their temporary successes. She learned about network infrastructure, cybersecurity, and digital forensics. Her hands, once used only for fixing physical components, now coded, configured, and protected entire systems. When others were chasing quick money, she was building something sustainable. Slowly, steadily, her small shop evolved into Miller Systems, a registered IT firm with clients across the city. She started hiring staff, mentoring them the same way she had taught herself, through patience and precision. Still, she told no one at home. Not because she wanted to hide, but because she wanted her work to speak before she did. Her family had mocked her too many times to deserve front-row seats to her progress. She stayed quiet, humble, grounded. While they lived for appearances, she lived for results. While they sought attention, she built consistency. There were lonely nights, of course. Nights when exhaustion crept in and doubt whispered that maybe her family was right. Maybe she'd chosen a harder road for nothing. She'd look at her hands, rough and calloused, and remember how Lucas's hands were always clean, how her mother's jewelry sparkled even in the dimmest light. But then she'd look at the servers running perfectly, the clients' messages of gratitude, and she'd remind herself, she wasn't chasing luxury, she was chasing freedom. As her company grew, so did her confidence. She started getting invited to professional conferences. She was asked to consult on government tech projects. Slowly, her name began circulating in places far beyond her little workshop. Yet, whenever she walked into a meeting, people still underestimated her. A young woman in a plain outfit didn't fit the image of a CEO. They expected someone older, louder, more traditionally powerful. But when she spoke, calm, precise, and informed, rooms went silent. Respect always came late, but it came. Meanwhile, her family's world stayed the same. Lucas bragged about bonuses, her parents about property sales. They still saw Ethan as the odd one out, the quiet one. "You're doing well, I hope?" her father would ask half-heartedly. She'd smile, knowing he had no idea that her company's yearly revenue had quietly surpassed his. There was no need to correct him. Her success didn't need validation, it was hers, not theirs. That's the thing about quiet ambition, it's invisible until it's undeniable. Ethan never shouted her achievements because she didn't need to. The people who laughed at her would one day see the results written in contracts, headlines, and signatures. Every moment of underestimation had been fuel, and she'd used it wisely. Her growth wasn't the kind that happened in boardrooms or with champagne toasts. It happened in the stillness of late nights, in moments no one clapped for. It happened every time she chose to focus instead of defend herself. That patience, that quiet fire, became her edge. By the time fate brought her back into her brother's professional orbit, she had already built something solid, respected, and far beyond their comprehension. They had spent years mocking her small beginnings, never realizing that the girl they dismissed was silently building the foundation they'd one day depend on. Ethan's ambition was never loud because it didn't need to be. True ambition doesn't roar, it endures. It grows quietly in the background until the world has no choice but to notice. And when that moment came, when she walked into that boardroom years later and watched the disbelief in her brother's eyes, she didn't need to say a single word. The silence she'd carried for years had finally spoken for her. The unexpected professional twist in Ethan's story didn't arrive with fanfare, it came disguised as an ordinary workday. She was sitting in her office, a quiet, glass-walled room above the workshop she'd built from nothing. The morning sun spilled across her desk, reflecting off the metallic edges of her laptop as she sipped coffee and sorted through client emails. Nothing about that day seemed extraordinary, until she saw the message that would change everything. The sender's name caught her eye first, Henderson and Burke Legal Associates, one of the city's most prestigious corporate law firms. At first, Ethan assumed it was a technical service request, maybe a consultation about data migration or system maintenance. But as she scrolled down, her expression shifted. The email wasn't about a standard repair or consultation. It was a formal business request for her to act as a third-party data reviewer and compliance signatory for a partnership dissolution. The project involved confidential audits, digital asset validation, and final approval of electronic transfers, serious, high-level work that required both technical and legal precision. It was the kind of job only top-tier professionals were trusted with. She read the client list twice to be sure she wasn't imagining it. The names on the file glared back at her like a twist of fate. One of the primary firms in the settlement was Whitmore Financial Group, her brother Lucas's company. The same brother who had once laughed at her for fixing broken laptops in a dusty shop. The same man who told her she'd never make it past being a technician. For a few long seconds, she just stared at the screen, her heart beating steadily, not with excitement, but with something colder, quieter. Poetic irony. Life had looped back in the most unexpected way. Her brother's multi-million-dollar partnership was falling apart, and now the only person authorized to approve the data transfers and finalize their digital settlement was the sister he once ridiculed. She leaned back in her chair and smiled faintly. The universe, she thought, had an impeccable sense of timing. It took her only a few minutes to reply. Professional tone. Polite language. No hint of personal connection. Asterisk, Dear Mr. Henderson, I confirm availability for the engagement. Kindly share the full terms of the review and settlement structure. Asterisk, she pressed send, feeling the strange satisfaction of knowing that destiny sometimes doesn't shout, it whispers, right when you least expect it. A week later, she walked into the tall glass tower that housed Whitmore Financial. She'd been there once before, years ago, when her father had taken her to see Lucas's world. Back then, she'd felt small in its marble hallways, her reflection swallowed by the shine of polished surfaces. But this time was different. She wasn't there as a visitor, she was there as the professional consultant whose name was on the legal agreement. When she arrived at the conference room, the firm's senior lawyer greeted her warmly. Ms. Miller, thank you for joining us. The partners are on their way. His tone carried respect, something her family had never given her. The door opened, and Lucas walked in, flanked by his two partners. He was mid-sentence, confident and animated, until his eyes landed on her. The change was instant. His words died on his tongue. Ethan, he said, his voice uncertain, almost disbelieving. She looked up calmly from her laptop. Good morning, Lucas. Please, have a seat. The silence that followed was electric. His partners exchanged puzzled looks. The lawyer, unaware of the personal connection, began the introductions. Gentlemen, this is Ms. Ethan Miller, the head of Miller Systems. She'll be overseeing the data compliance and approving the final asset transfer before we proceed. Lucas blinked. You own Miller Systems? Ethan smiled politely. Yes. For about 6 years now. He didn't speak for a while. You could see the realization dawning, the slow, humiliating recognition that the sister he once mocked had not only caught up but surpassed him in quiet power. She wasn't there to fix anything for him this time. She was there to authorize his company's next move. The meeting began, and Ethan slipped seamlessly into her professional rhythm. Her voice was steady, her explanations clear. She pointed out inconsistencies in their reports, corrected outdated encryption logs, and recommended restructuring their data migration sequence. Every word she spoke was a reminder that she didn't need to raise her voice to command authority. The lawyer nodded along, impressed. Lucas sat stiffly, watching the woman he'd underestimated control the very conversation that determined his firm's future. At one point, one of the partners asked, Ms. Miller, will your approval be required before we release the client database? Ethan looked at Lucas before answering. Yes. Nothing moves forward until I verify and sign off. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. But still, the irony was sweet. When the meeting ended, she gathered her files and stood to leave. Lucas rose too, as if to speak, but no words came. The arrogance that had always wrapped him like armor was gone, replaced by something almost human, regret. At the door, she turned back slightly. "I'll send my findings within the week," she said. Her tone was professional, but her eyes carried the quiet message her voice didn't need to say. "Now you understand." As she stepped out of that towering building, she didn't feel triumph or anger, just peace. The twist wasn't about revenge or payback. It was about realization. About how life eventually balances itself without needing anyone's help. Ethan hadn't planned for this moment, but it felt earned. Every late night, every insult, every quiet step forward had led her here. The girl who once fixed cables and motherboards in a dusty workshop was now the woman whose signature could finalize a $1 million settlement. It was poetic, yes, but more than that, it was proof. Proof that sometimes the most unexpected twists aren't coincidences. They're confirmations that you were on the right path all along. When the final papers were signed and the settlement was complete, Ethan didn't celebrate. There was no grand victory speech, no rush of adrenaline or satisfaction. Just quiet stillness. She sat in her office, the same place where it had all begun years ago, surrounded by the hum of machines she'd once fixed by hand. The world outside buzzed with the noise of success, but inside, Ethan found peace in silence. That was her closure, not applause, not recognition, but calm acceptance that she no longer needed anyone's approval to know her worth. For years, she'd carried the weight of her family's laughter. Every joke about her little repair shop, every pitying look when she said she worked with her hands, it had carved deep lines into her memory. There were nights she'd wondered if they were right, if maybe she had aimed too small or dreamed too quietly. But as she looked around now, at her thriving company, her steady team, and her name printed in bold on contracts from major clients, she finally understood that the path she chose wasn't small. It was simply her own. Her brother, Lucas, had tried calling her after the settlement. He wanted to talk, maybe to apologize, maybe to rewrite history. She didn't answer right away. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired of carrying the same story. When she finally did meet him for coffee weeks later, the air between them was different. The arrogance that used to coat his words was gone. He looked older, softer, almost uncertain. "I didn't know you built something that big," he said quietly, stirring his drink without looking up. Ethan smiled faintly. "I didn't build it to impress you." He winced, then nodded. "I know. That's why it worked." For the first time, there was honesty between them, not rivalry, not comparison, just truth. She didn't need him to apologize. The moment he looked at her with respect instead of pity, the old wounds began to heal. It wasn't forgiveness she sought, it was recognition. And now, without words, she had it. As she walked back to her car that day, the city felt different. The same streets she used to walk in exhaustion now felt like victory laps. The same buildings that once intimidated her now seemed small. She thought about all those years she'd spent hiding her progress, afraid they'd mock her again, and realized she had wasted time trying to prove something to people who could never see beyond themselves. They weren't her audience anymore. Her success was hers alone, private and pure. Back in her workshop, Ethan spent an afternoon cleaning the space where it all began, the old wooden bench, the cracked table, the tools she hadn't used in years. She ran her hand along the faded metal of her first soldering iron, remembering the nights she'd fallen asleep at that very table with coffee gone cold beside her. That place wasn't just where her business started, it was where she started. Where she learned patience, endurance, and the quiet kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. Her parents eventually came around too. When her mother called one evening, her tone was different, not patronizing, but proud. "Your father and I heard about your company," she said softly. "You've done well, sweetheart." Ethan smiled, grateful but detached. "Thank you, Mom. I just did what I love." That was all she said, and it was enough. She didn't need validation anymore. The girl who once sat quietly at family dinners, enduring their laughter, no longer sought their approval. She had become her own definition of success. Over time, Ethan noticed something interesting. The more she stopped trying to prove herself, the more peace she found. She began taking weekends off, mentoring young women who wanted to enter tech but didn't know where to start. She told them her story not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in resilience. Let them laugh, she'd say. You'll build while they talk. And one day, they'll realize they were laughing at the foundation of something they'll wish they had. That was Ethan's real revenge, turning pain into purpose, doubt into drive. The family who once mocked her had become silent witnesses to her success. Not because she rubbed it in, but because success that speaks softly leaves no room for arguments. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. On quiet evenings, Ethan would sometimes stand by her office window and watch the city lights. She didn't think about her family anymore, or the things they'd said. She thought about the journey, the fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, and how every setback had prepared her for moments like this. She realized that closure doesn't come from watching others regret their mistakes. It comes from finally being free of needing them to. Her story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about evolution. The laughter that once hurt had turned into background noise, irrelevant in the face of who she had become. The girl they underestimated had grown into a woman who didn't just succeed, she outlasted them all. So when she shut down her office lights each night and the machines went silent, Ethan felt no emptiness. Just peace. The kind of peace that comes when you've proven everything you needed to, not to the world, but to yourself. That was her final realization, her true closure, that the loudest victory is the one lived in quiet confidence, long after everyone else has stopped talking.